All right, if we can, I'd like to call this meeting to order. We're all present for members of the board. And this is a public hearing. We will call a public hearing to order in a moment. But I will introduce our panel of wonderful board members. Selectmen's representative, everyone knows Dick Bennett. Board members, Chris McAleer, alternate, Mr. Allen, and you will be voting this evening. I just noticed that. Yes. Kathleen Dougherty, Scott Badger, I end up being Chair Bill Terry, and Sarah. And let's call it public hearing to open. We're here tonight to review, and if you don't have one, please, there's more copies at the door so everyone can follow. What you have here is the posting that went up with the notice, and because last time we had a couple of changes between the posting and the actual conversation, it was really hard to follow. I apologize for that. What I did this time was anything that we had that we've taken into consideration that we ought to take into consideration for this evening based on comments we received, I've included them in, and they're here underlined. Our Secretary David Campbell did that for us. And you'll note what they are. There's the one change we had from a comment from Jay Henry, who's our fire chief, was that reference was made to town adopted codes. And we don't have town adopted codes. We have the New Hampshire State Fire Code and the New Hampshire State Building Code. So technically we were referencing the wrong things, and we changed that so the reference is accurate. Same thing that's on the, there's two places where that occurs. All the other changes are changes that we did, and we'll talk about them through what we agreed to between the last time we had a public hearing and now. The only other item that's listed as an underlined item is one that we're taking under consideration, and that is indicating that we would not be limiting the number of annual rentals for short-term rentals that were in existence in the rural residential district at the time of the adoption of this ordinance. And that is a clarification of intent. It was generated based on a letter that we received from the Armstrongs, which we appreciated. And they indicated concern that we were going to be limiting them to the 25, which we adjusted to 30 rentals, when we had indicated in the public hearing itself that was not our intention to do so. So we just wanted to clarify that, and because it's clarification of intent, it's not really a change or an adjustment to what was posted. But I would like to go through what we have and the changes we did make. We did not make a lot of changes, and then once I've done that, we can open it up and we can have whatever kind of conversation you'd like to have, within reason. Primarily, the changes we discussed at our board meeting, a work session that we had just prior to the posting. And most of you are familiar with the things if you've been keeping up with e-news or with the great article we had on the Conway Daily Sun. Primarily, the changes we made were to the number of rentals that would be allowed by a property we changed it from the 25 to the number 30. We did that because we heard from folks that 25 was, you know, if you're doing this thing, 25 is too restrictive. And 30 was a more reasonable number. When we picked 25 out of the air, we did that based on the idea that 20 was too few and 35 was too many. So we'd come up with 25. We agreed 30 was probably a pretty good number among us. And so we came up with that. The other changes that we made go all the way down to the 4.4.6, and that is that we looked at the may or will, and we had a whole bunch, we'll do this, we'll do that, and we changed will to may and will to may for the first two opportunities. So the first violation is now listed as a may result in a warning instead of will result in a warning. Second violation may result in a civil penalty instead of will result in a civil penalty. We did retain the will for the third violation. The whole idea there is that if a violation occurs and seems to be a violation but it's conditional, it allows for some flexibility. It's not an automatic. By the time you messed up the third time, it's probably a will. And that was kind of our reasoning behind that. The other change that was made to the whole thing was 4.4.3.6 B. Oh goodness. B2, and that is windows and/or doors designated for emergency egress are maintained and in operational order. And that was based on Dick Bennett calling to our attention that what we had written previously was pretty poorly done. And this gets at it exactly what we intended. So. Those were the changes. Everything else is pretty much the same. In fact, very much the same. Do I have any comments from any board members on what we have here?
The number of rentals, is that going to be leaving us open to litigation? Is that resolved any place?
Peter Malia didn't feel that.
As a lawyer, he understands.
There's no indication. In fact, more restrictive kinds of things have occurred where folks have said you can't do, or you can only have so many days. Doing a limit is not out of the ordinary. Our approach to it is probably slightly different, but it simply says we're creating a limit. Creating a limit has not been something that has been found to be a problem.
Okay. I just want.
Can people litigate against anything? Yeah.
Well, people are going to be unhappy with many aspects of it, but I just don't want to open this up to,
It did not appear that was something that was going to immediately someone looks at that and says, yeah, that's what we go after.
Okay.
I also have a comment that I would like to make. When you have, first of all, the people that have short-term rentals have to come and sign an affidavit. We don't have a process at all for that taking place, who's going to be doing it, what the framework is going to be of it. When you have an affidavit, it is a lawful document, and the minimum qualifications for sending it is a notary public has to sign it.
Yes,
And that's all takes time. You're talking about 100 rentals here in Jackson.
Yes.
And who's going to be doing the work? Are they going to be paid for it? And that all kinds of things need to be addressed.
I think that the principal requirement is if you don't establish a process for something that has not been approved. But we do have a basis for what we're intending. We've already established the kinds of things that we're going to be asking on that affidavit. We have a notary public here.
I know there's 3 of them. The girls are in,
And
yes.
they're available without charge here in the town offices. So when somebody comes in and brings one in, they can do that. And if they don't live in Jackson and they're doing an affidavit, notary publics, there's thousands, literally tens of thousands of them in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire.
And I see this as a 5-minute process at the town office. I don't see that this is an onerous process. In fact, we've done everything we can to make it as little time consuming as possible.
It's basically a checklist. It says, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? If you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and folks who are in the short-term rental business, none of this is unusual. It's expected. And all we're doing is saying, what we're asking is that you agree that you're doing what's expected of you, both by state fire codes and by requirements that have been already established for renting a property. And if you're in the short-term rental business, most of you are familiar with doing the rooms and meals tax. That's not unusual. If you're obtaining insurance, most of these things are things that someone's actually going to check out that you've done. So all we're doing is asking folks to agree that they have done what they should be doing. And if they haven't been doing them, it will be new to them. And if it's new to them, then they're surprise, and there's some things that they should be doing that they need to do in order to be in the business.
Okay, and the other thing is that I know the town's getting ready to have the town vote on the noise issues here in town. And we also have a parking ordinance on the streets too already in place. And those are the main concerns that the residents that live here year-round were concerned about. Well, they are going to be addressed. And I don't understand the reasoning behind, and because the short-term rental thing is a big deal right now, but the town of Jackson's been doing it forever. And I think sometimes I don't like cumbersome laws and things like that, and I just think it makes it more difficult, and also pits neighbor against neighbor. And you know, there's a party going on and it's really loud and noisy, and well, we have a zoning ordinance and we have a way to enforce that by the police coming and enforcing it. And we're not like the other towns in the valley. Jackson's always been a resort town, and 3/4 of the people that come to visit us have short-term rentals here. I mean, they then rent their house out. And there's really hasn't been that much of an issue. And no matter how you look at it, it's the owner's responsibility for their house, who they rent it to, how their septic system is, what their insurance is, and it's really not, I don't think it's any of the town's business, to tell you the truth. Anyway, that's my opinion.
And you're entitled.
The whole reason that, the main reason that we're doing this is because our zoning ordinance right now, if you read it literally, would say that short-term, a commercial business of the short-term is not allowed. And so this is...
It's been going on for a long time. This is
right,
new.
but it's getting to the point where because short-term rentals have become so much the issue right now, and that what we're doing is trying to get so that those people who are doing it and not realizing that it is not allowed in our zoning ordinance, this is getting it so that it is allowed, and it has, we have some regulations about it. They may not be fairly minimal regulations, but at least it gives us, the town, a chance to know where the short-term rentals are.
And I think I would add to that, if there were a complaint, the town found itself in a position where it had to apply the law that's in place, it would have to apply that law without discrimination. So that means short-term rental businesses, but also it means second home short-term rentals, and it means homes occupied long-term with short-term rentals. All of those, the town would have to eliminate under current law.
That would be wiping it all out. I mean, it's been going on for a long time.
Well, this is why.
You know,
we
if you carry arguments to their logical conclusion, one could argue that right now, and I think to Dick's point around litigation, that the town is not enforcing the law. And that we have businesses operating in the rural residential district that should not be. And that a homeowner, if they so chose, could sue the town for not following their own zoning ordinances.
We also have a thing in here about it, you know, I don't like the process of, it goes to the selectmen, it has to go to the planning board, and then it has to go back to be approved again. And that could take up 30 days. And I think that's too long.
It's the law.
Right now, there's only two
There
ways.
isn't any law on this right now because the state hasn't applied it yet.
That part of it is the law. And we've gone over this several times.
And I know we have, and I don't like it.
Well, you don't like the law is the law. We only have two choices to implement this. One is a special use permit, and the other is a conditional use permit. Those are the two opportunities we have that the state has handed us. That's it. That's all we can use.
But
If
we
you don't
also-
have a planning board, you can't use either. You're seeing
I
that
know,
as
I've
a
heard that,
Kearsarge
yes.
issue. They're having an issue with either, and
And they're being sued.
they're being told that they can't do anything because they do not have a planning board. But you can't do anything unless you follow this or you follow that currently. Now, we understand that there is state legislation that's currently being looked at that might make the process simpler. Does not require all the different movements through the planning board. But I would like to point out that the process that we have that's established here also allows for a grievance process. If there,
Might I talk?
yeah, no, please, if I can, I'd be happy to recognize you as soon as I can, okay? But it also offers for a grievance process. That's in a couple of places. One, yeah, if there's a violation at the back end, but I'm talking about on the front end. If someone puts in an application and there's a problem with that application being approved, someone has the opportunity to say, I have a problem with you not approving. Vice versa, if it is approved and somebody has a problem with it being approved, they can also say there's a problem with it being approved. None of the state legislation process that I've looked at has any of those provisions. It's strictly a dog license kind of process. You apply, you get it stamped, done. And it would seem to me that if we use the process that's here, that's allowed us, it offers either the person who is doing the short-term rental or someone who doesn't like the idea of a short-term rental to take a look at that and say there's a problem with this application. Not that they can create something that's phony to stop it, but they can say, hey, this person, you didn't do any inspections, and maybe they signed an affidavit that said they're doing these things, but there's no way they're meeting the requirements, as a for example.
Well, we can't go in and do inspections.
I didn't say we could, but there's a grievance process that would allow that could occur. And so by having that, it allows that to, potentially to happen. And otherwise, you don't have anything like that. Go ahead, please, if you may. Name, please. if
My
you-
name is Nicola Anderson, and we have 26 Greenhill Road, and we do short-term rentals, but it's also my husband's official residence as well. And what I'm concerned about is that it could become like a witch hunt. If you get a neighbourhood and you get 3 of the people in the block who don't want any short-term rentals, then they could literally get a wee petition up, get local town people against these people because they don't like the fact they're from Scotland. And they could make a lot of difficulty for somebody getting a planning board going through this whole process. And it just doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem fair that people aren't given the dog license right away, and then yes, if they have a problem with them later on, if they don't follow the rules and their cars are parked in the street, then you've got the right to sort of stop them doing it. But to have this arbitrary planning board group of people saying that you're going to get a license, I don't want you being in competition with me, therefore I don't want you to get the. I just think it does. It puts neighbour against neighbour.
Yes.
And I don't think, to be perfectly honest, we do a little bit of short-term rental, but most of the time we've got a bunch of friends up there, or Girl Guides or Scouts or something like that. They make more chaos than normal. We're not renting it, but the people we bring up there are probably noisier and more offensive than the people who are renting our house. It just doesn't seem, policing,
There's nothing arbitrary about this at all.
well, it is, what were the criteria of the planning board? They said they can decline an application.
Only if the application doesn't follow what's in the ordinance.
Oh, but the ordinance,
So this,
it does not what it
specific
says.
guideline.
It
there's
does not say
absolutely
that.
nothing
It doesn't say
arbitrary.
that.
about
There's no,
doesn't say
there is no requirement that's arbitrary. There's none.
So there's guidelines and parameters that have to be met in order to get the permit.
Yes, you either have it or you don't. And
Right,
if you
so-
do, you do, and if you don't, you don't.
So it's like the fire extinguisher in the kitchen,
That's not what it
doors
says
and
here.
windows. Well,
Well, that is what it does say.
Is it?
I'm sorry, it is what it says. And there's nothing implied or arbitrary or unintended. In fact, we made a special effort when we heard someone say that we weren't clear, that we're going to add another sentence in to be sure
I
that,
thought it said, maybe I'm misreading it.
so it's the
Way
fire
out.
extinguisher, the
Yes.
windows and doors operating well, and that's the
Right.
parameters. And if you meet those, then you get the permit.
yes.
Okay.
That's not actually what it says here. It says, upon receipt of planning board's written comments, the board of selectmen will place the application on the agenda for the next meeting and either approve or deny of the application.
Based on the merits of the application.
It does miss that sentence though, because I was wondering the same thing.
It implies if based on written comments, so the neighbours might have ganged up and be complaining against somebody. That's not going to happen.
No, we allow for comment, but the comment does not, it does not change how an application
Okay,
is.
so as long as you
approved.
get your fire extinguisher and your exits and no basement, then you're fine.
It's on the
And
application.
smoke alarms.
The comments will be by comments from members of the planning board, not just any comment from anybody in the town. They could bring that in, and if there is a legitimate complaint about it, that something needs to be done to make sure that the owner is applying all of the, meets all of the criteria, then that's how it would be judged.
Edith?
Edith Houlihan. I think that, to clarify, it seems to me that this affidavit, you filled it out, and you're saying on your honor that you have met all the criteria.
Correct.
Then you're bringing it and getting it notarized, and then you're giving it to the planning board, or the board of selectmen, to the planning board, and back to the board of selectmen. And I can't see any reason why anybody on their first application would ever get rejected because they're signing an affidavit that this is all correct.
Right.
So it's just, I think it's just the paperwork formality, because at the last meeting, it was said that there would be no inspections. So it's not like a building permit where you pay and then they come and look and then they come back. So I don't really think anybody can get rejected on the first time.
Because you are signing the
Because you
affidavit.
are signing that you have met that criteria.
It would be, from my perspective, the process is pretty much what they call pro forma. It's
It's a dog license.
It's
Yeah.
a dog, basically, we tried to make it as much like a dog license as we can and still run through all the hoops that are allowed us. I mean, initially, we were talking about trying to do inspections and, you know, it's like, no, let's try to keep it as simple as we can, try to keep it as much as we can. I think to your point, it's difficult, but on the other hand, it's a single piece of paper. Somebody needs to check it off, sign it, get it notarized, and that piece of paper goes through a process, yeah, because state law requires that. But it's, again, unless there's something really fishy about it, and it's going to pass through without any pause. If someone knowingly has lied on their thing, I suppose that might come up. But you know,
And the 30 days, that's contracts, not days.
30 rentals.
30 rentals, yeah.
So
They could be a week, 2 weeks,
They
5
could be
weeks.
32-week
They could be-
rentals.
Yeah.
For instance.
Yeah.
How did you, last time,
Bob, please, your name, please.
Bob Cantak, I'm a 35-year resident here in Jackson, full-time resident. So how did you guys decide to increase it from 25 to 30 rentals? Because the trouble I have is, yes, this has been a big second home community, and yes, any number of second homeowners were renting their places out occasionally to do what? Cover maybe their taxes and the utilities to make owning it a little easier, and as well as enjoying the place. But we've reached a degree now where people are trying to, and the zoning, I think, allows for owner-occupied, full-time B&Bs and country inns. And we're getting now to where business, non-owner occupied businesses are being established in a rural residential zone. And I just have a big problem with it, beyond which where these things are being scooped up, and there are plenty of people who want to live here full-time, who work here either in Jackson or elsewhere in the valley, and can't afford a house. So I just don't know why we're increasing it from 25 to 30 rentals, which if the average rental is 3 nights or 4 nights, and all of a sudden balloons into 100 and something, 120, 130 nights, where it becomes a business. And we shouldn't be allowing, the zoning allows for owner-occupied lodging establishments in the rural residential zone. I just hate to see this thing get swept away because a bunch of people want to pick up houses and treat them as business. Those original second homeowners were not treating their places as business properties. They weren't depreciating them. They weren't writing off, all the costs associated with the rental. And I think as a town, we have to look ourselves, check our souls as to what we want as a community. And I would like to see it, I'm not saying we do it at all, but I'd much rather see it 25 or 20. And that's plenty, because otherwise you are incentivizing businesses in a residential zone, and that's going to be, we're going to have hell to pay for.
So whether it's 25 or 30 or 20,
Or 20, yeah.
it's a number, it's a stab in the dark, I mean,
Right.
honestly.
I'd rather think
And
30
so-
nights of rentals.
And at
That's
this
it.
point, it's, we can't change that number and move forward this year. So,
Why did you change it to 30 though?
well, we felt that 20, we heard that 25 was a little restrictive.
Heard from whom?
From whom? Yeah.
From the public hearing, the last public hearing, we heard quite a bit of noise that was not a good number.
In any case, our feeling is that even at 30, that still dissuades someone from purchasing a property for short-term rentals. That's not 120 days, to use your example,
That's
would
right.
be a 33% occupancy rate, which I don't think would support that type of business. So my gut feeling is that 30 rentals dissuades the purchase of a property as a short-term rental commercial business, but gives a little bit more leeway to the second homers.
Could I ask, Sarah, did you say that as it stands now?
Can you please identify yourself,
Ann
please?
Tantak.
Thank you.
Full-time resident for 35 years. As it stands now, did you say that the law or the zoning says that we cannot have short-term rentals in residential areas? Isn't that what you said?
As a business, a commercial business.
Well, then why are we trying to make it so that that can happen? Because I think that is a good law. I don't want my neighborhood to turn into a, rental machine.
But I think, as Bob said, vacation homes, second homes is really part of the character and the nature of this area.
Sure.
Not allowing
Absolutely.
short-term rentals at all would not allow second homes to help support the ownership.
And I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah, but if you carry it to your logic, you have to apply it equally. Therefore, if you say no, you have to say no to everybody. You can't just say, oh, to your point, you can't just say, well, you I can say yes to, but no, you I can't.
No, that's not the position. I'm not taking the position that you cannot. I'm just saying, going back to the days of old, where second homeowners were simply doing a random occasional rental to cover modest expenses, and they weren't treating it as a business property. They aren't depreciating. They're not writing off the cost. And the zoning, as I asked a couple of meetings ago, allows for owner-occupied lodging, B&Bs. And as long as it's owner-occupied, guess what? The place tends to be well-run, tidy, quiet. And when they're not owner-occupied, the owner happens to live down in the greater Boston area, all hell can break loose, and that's not, I don't think it does anything for property values. And I have a profound disagreement with a lot of I'm a realtor, and I disagree profoundly with a bunch of other realtors that say, oh, it's property rights and property values will increase with this. I disagree big time. I think well-regulated zoning increases property values.
But to Ann's point, if we used our current law, we would have to apply that to all second home short-term rentals, whether it's once a year or 100 times a year. And any homes, an owner-occupied home would probably be okay, but a long-term tenant-occupied home wouldn't be. And so,
What do you mean, on a year's lease?
excuse me?
On a
No, I'm
year's
saying
lease?
that the law that we have right now,
Yeah.
we have a permissive zoning,
Mhm.
and in the commercial district, we allow hotels,
Sure.
and our definition of hotels is very broad and includes short-term rentals. It's
Mhm.
transient occupancy, and may also have a restaurant or a gift shop, but not necessarily. And so I think it's pretty clear that short-term rentals come under that hotel definition. That's permitted in commercial, it's not permitted in residential. So that means that my take on our current law is that we don't allow short-term rentals, but that means we don't allow short-term rentals of any stripe, whether
Right.
it's long-term occupied or second home or short-term rental as a business, all three of those types of
So
short-term
we
rentals.
don't allow it, but we are allowing it. We're sort of-
That's my personal
Right.
opinion.
Blind eye.
And to I think Kathleen's point is that has been pretty much the nature of what has been occurring in
Not
town is
anything
that
like
we
it is
have
now.
allowed individuals
Right.
to use their property and also to rent their property when they're not using it.
But it's a matter of degree, though. and
Exactly.
it's different.
Exactly.
There used to be occasional rentals, but now this is becoming big time.
Exactly. We
Business
agree with you.
properties in a residential
Yeah.
zone. And I think this is what you're trying to do, is get a grip on this thing.
And put a
Keep
containment on it.
But
And it is very different now than it used to be.
Right.
It's very different now within like the past 2 or 3 years.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And so,
Exactly.
it doesn't surprise me that this hasn't come up, that Jackson hasn't applied its current zoning up until now, because it hasn't been the thing that it is now.
So we,
My guess is if we don't do anything, if this ordinance doesn't pass, I'd say there's a pretty good chance, given the emotion around short-term rentals now, given some of the impacts that they're having, sometimes a particular one, sometimes in general, that if we don't have an ordinance, someone is going to file a complaint to the town, and the town will find itself in a position where it does have to apply its
Enforce the
current
law.
law. And once it starts, as Bill said, it can't do that in a discriminatory fashion. It has to apply it across the board.
Yeah.
And so our ordinance is both to protect the residential area in terms of short-term rentals running wild, but it's also to protect the short-term rentals that benefit the area. And maybe the numbers aren't exactly right, but we're doing the best we can.
could I just ask one more question? I'm sorry, if someone else is next, go ahead.
Go ahead. If it's a follow-up, go ahead.
Well, I was working the last 2 meetings and I couldn't come, but I thought it was 25 rentals a year, but now it says between 1 and 30 consecutive nights, so I think theoretically, you're not.
No.
That's the definition.
That's the definition of what a short-term rental
But
is.
where does it say 30?
She's right. On the side of the
Okay.
she's right.
Okay, then I stand corrected. I thought it was saying 1 consecutive, you could have 365 instead of 25, Thanks, but you're saying it would be now 30 rentals,
That's correct. Yeah, not 30 nights of rentals.
but 30
But 30
rental
rentals,
episodes. But where
yes.
does it say?
And each rental will be less than 30 days.
45-1,
What's it?
Each-
middle of the second page.
Okay, yeah. Rentals per year.
All right, Jerry, so please, if you could, identify yourself.
Jerry Doherty, Jackson. Several things. Bob stated that you can do a bed and breakfast in the rural residential. You cannot. You can only do bed and breakfast in the village district unless you were a bed and breakfast prior to the zoning going in. For example, folks wanted to buy the castle and they asked to do it as a bed and breakfast. They were denied because they were in the rural residential. That was just a clarification. Some of the questions I had. The definition of an STR is 1 to 30 days. So you can have 30 rentals of it. Most rentals are not 3 or 4 days, they're a week. So
About that, yeah.
if you talk to the people that rent them, you'll see that. But if
There's 2 nights.
if it's a week,
I think the folks in the short-term rental business will tell you the average is 2 nights.
It's like hotels, it's the same thing.
I have a 1 week minimum.
yeah, most have a 1 week. But anyway, regardless, they can by this ordinance, and you keep saying second homes. In order to meet the definition of this ordinance, it need not be a second home.
Correct.
If I go away for 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, I can short-term rental my house while I'm away.
That's correct.
And I can do it 30 times by this ordinance. Therefore, every single property in Jackson could be an STR, whether it's all the units at Wentworth or any home in Jackson by this definition, as long as you meet the requirements and register with the state. That seems to me like, again, you're not meeting the definition of your purposes of the purposes of the ordinance. I'll go back. One final point. As you know, 674 is authorized by the master plan.
Pardon me?
674, the ordinance that they're referencing, that they have to reference in order to authorize the legality of this ordinance, states that the ordinance must take its footing from the master plan. The very first item, the very first goal of our master plan is that ordinance shall not be cumbersome and that they shall be simple. This ordinance, and I recognize the constraints you were under, and I acknowledge the work that you have done. But this ordinance does not meet the requirements of your master plan.
I beg to differ. This could
I
be
also
more
beg to
simple.
differ. That's your opinion, you're entitled to it, but
Do you
we've
think that-
discussed this before. You're entitled to your opinion.
Just answer this question. Do you think this ordinance is simple and not cumbersome?
Yes,
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Otherwise-
It's probably one of the simplest ordinances we have in our zoning. It's straightforward, it's clear, it's a 5-minute process at the town office. It does have to go back and forth
Please,
between the
one-
planning, the board of selectmen and the planning board, which is unfortunate, and I'm sure we'll change that if we're given the opportunity. but-
With respect to the aggrieved parties, you're referencing the fact that an aggrieved party might possibly and could possibly be the applicant. You reference the fact that an aggrieved party may be in a butter. All kinds of people
there's a
qualify as
possibility,
abutters.
that's correct.
How would an abutter know that the property was being offered or being applied for as an STR without a notice of public, for the public hearing? In other words, you're correct that no public hearing is required by either the PB or the BOS. So how would an abutter know that they may be an aggrieved party, or that they may have an interest in at least listening to the hearing of the PB or the BOS?
I suspect it would be on the agendas, which are always posted, of the meetings.
Okay,
You're assuming-
I'm going to try to not repeat, I've got two folks who have not been able to talk before, please, and who have had their hands up before, please.
Thank you. My name is David Armstrong. I'm not a long-term resident, only about 6 years. But we have 2 rental properties, 2 short-term rental properties in the village, both about a mile from our home. We've been doing it now for 11 or 12 years. I'm greatly disturbed with the semantics of your first statement in terms of purpose. If I just may read it. To preserve the traditional character of residential neighborhoods that can be negatively impacted by this type of use. I'm suggesting that your board has a significant bias when you start with wording.
I agree.
If I may, the revenue that I do get from both cabins is plowed back in. The one side empty for 3 years, significant state of disrepair. The other was used maybe 2 weeks out of the 52-week year. I haven't seen any upgrades for decades. I was able to take revenue from that. The house where I live opposite the graveyard in Mill Street, folks know what it looked like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Where do you think that came from? All I'm doing is enhancing this village. I can't think of anything that we have done, and we've worked really hard at it. I can't think of anything we've done that's done nothing but enhance the quality of the traditional character of this residential neighborhood. I take great offense to this assumption that short-term rentals are just negative. Every time I hear the word impact, it's negative impact. From this board and from other people in this room. How about the positive impacts?
But that doesn't, we're not making that assumption.
It's assumed in the statement.
No, it says may, and that certainly is the
Does it
case.
say may
It
be
doesn't
positive?
say will.
Doesn't say will.
But it doesn't say may positively affect it.
Can be. And there's certainly neighborhoods that have been negatively impacted by short-term.
And there are certainly neighborhoods that have been positively impacted, which you bring forward. The difficulty I have with this, and I don't expect that if we've done this exactly correctly, there should be nobody happy in the room. All right? Because there are folks who don't wish to have any short-term rentals in town, in the rural residential district. You've heard that already. They don't want them at all. They want to put you out of business. They don't want them. They think you're the evil incarnate. Okay. And we have others like yourself who are in the business say, hey, we're doing all the right things. You should appreciate us. And there are folks who are in the lodging industry who say you're competitors, we shouldn't have you. But we have renters who say, yeah, we would like to have short-term rentals because it gives us a choice between this kind of accommodation and that kind of accommodation. You hear people who are on the board who say, we're a resort town. We've been doing resort town stuff forever, and that's true. And so the question really is about what is the balance? What is the balance of what we do? Do we have entirely, as we have currently in our ordinance, that says the rural residential district, it's just rural residential, you shouldn't be there. And, oh, by the way, if someone does sue us, then the selectmen are in a position where the traditional forms of rentals are also come into question. And it puts them in a bind. So right now, everybody's in a bind for what we haven't done. And what we're trying to do is to say, look, we don't want to be a community of short-term rentals entirely. And yet, I think, I wasn't sure if I heard it correctly, if it was Bob or Jerry or whomever said, well, by authorizing this, yes, everybody could possibly be a short-term rental offerer. And the answer is that gets very close to, I think, Kathleen, what you said, we've been doing all along anyway. And so it gets there. But what it does, and this is the thing that to me is important, and I think Scott said it. If we pass this, if we get this going, folks who are doing the right things can continue doing what they're doing. If somebody else chooses to go into the short-term rental business or hasn't really thought of themselves as being in the short-term rental business, even if they are, they need to get in line, if you will, with basic requirements so that renters are safe and that we're making sure that all the requirements of offering out your residence as a short-term rental are being met. I think that if we were all in the business of doing short-term rentals and every property in town turned into one of those, this would not be the town we want to be in. And so I think that by putting this in place, what we've done is we've started to limit the opportunity.
Without eliminating it.
Without eliminating it. And saying, yeah, okay, if you're already in, we haven't been after you, you're okay. But if I'm an investor and there's software out there that says, if you're an investor, you have a spare $500,000, $1 million, this is the place to put your money. It's not likely you're going to go to look at Jackson anymore because you're going to say, I'm only going to get 33% of my occupancy. That's crazy. Why am I going to buy into that? So I think no, it doesn't. If it satisfies somebody completely, I think we've done a bad job. And if you feel that it's not meeting your needs exactly, I think, yeah, we probably did a good job. Go ahead.
First I'll say I think you've done a good job from what I've heard. But the question I have is, if your fire extinguishers are all in order and your egress is all and exit is all fine, can an abutter be a reason why your application would be denied? Because I had a property in Sandwich, and if my abutter could have prevented me from short-term rentals, they would have done.
No, I think I don't know what the definition of an aggrieved party is, but to be honest, I don't know what that is. But I would expect that they would have to be aggrieved somehow, and I don't know how they would be aggrieved. Simply because
They can't be offended just because it's a short-term rental. There has to have been a problem. Noise, parking, dogs, obvious overcrowding, a leaking septic system. Something has to have happened. They can't just go, oh, I don't like you, you're a short-term rental. That's not a basis.
That's not an agreement.
I mean, they could say it is, but it's not. And that's why you would have a hearing. Go ahead.
I just want to clarify something. I brought this up in 2 separate meetings that the current zoning would allow someone to operate a full-time B&B or country inn in a rural residential zone so long as it's owner occupied. I was very, very explicit about that now and the last time I was here. That's my understanding, is as long as it's owner occupied, you could set up a full-time lodging business in the rural residential zone as long as it's owner occupied. And to me, that's very critical.
You would have to be less than 3 people working
What?
there. There's a limit,
Yeah, there are,
there's a limited number of people that can work there.
So,
And it's home occupation. I mean, you know, there's a difference between a residential home and an inn, you know, something.
It's a
built-
home occupation, it has to be occupied by the owner.
there we go. So the Carter Dodge.
Let me finish,
Okay, I'm
please.
sorry.
It has to be occupied by the owner. The life safety codes for a bed and breakfast are different because the owner is there. They will lead you out if there's a fire. They don't have pull stations and all the things that a motel.
You have to have pull stations. When we bought.
You're not, you're an inn.
We're a bed and breakfast.
But you're in the village district, not the
In the
rural.
commercial zone.
Right.
Right, but we were required to put in pull stations, exit lights, exit signs by fire.
Anyway, it has to be owner occupied.
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah.
Take the Carter Dodge Inn, that's the country inn that hasn't been around that long, maybe
The
20 years,
Wen-
owner occupied.
Wentworth's Castle asked to be a venue for weddings. They wanted to be a commercial enterprise.
Yeah,
They were not trying to be just a bed and breakfast.
there you go.
They wanted to be, they wanted the little outbuilding to be, you know, a cook's cabin and, so they were asking for something different. They wanted to be a commercial enterprise, and they are just outside of the
Yeah,
district. So we said, no,
of course.
we're not going to change our districts for one venue.
But
Where does the residential district start on Cardinal Trail?
Down the hill.
now,
500
That's grandfather's?
500 feet from the,
Yes,
Yeah.
Christmas Farm Inn, Eagle Mountain House, Whitney's.
They're all
How long have they been there?
yeah, they're great.
Before there was,
Yeah.
there wasn't a planning board.
Right.
But is, for example, Mill Street in the commercial zone, the village district or not?
No.
There's a resident, what,
the village district extends 500 feet from the center line of
Of the
16A.
of 16A and 16.
So Mill Street.
Or 16, it's all,
Mill Street is much
16A.
more than 500 feet, so I assume that the rental property that the Armstrongs
So we
have.
don't rent that, that's our house.
All right, well, what, I'm sorry, well, I don't need to get into details about where your rental, it sounded like you had rental properties that are already in the commercial district, so there's no beef there. And at least I personally have no problem. I'm not saying I want to have no rentals. There has been a tradition of people renting out second homes and all that. I'd like to preserve that to a degree, and I think what Scott said in the last 2-3 years is going way beyond the degree of, the occasional rental. It's more businesses that are popping up in the rural residential zone, and that is troublesome.
And people that are buying up affordable houses that people, young families would like to buy and live in town. And now they're being bought up, a lot of them are being bought up by people that don't live anywhere near here and are just using it as a short-term rental. And that, I think that's a problem, because that prevents young families from moving into town or moving into the valley. It's unfortunate.
Edith?
I don't think that comment is necessarily reflective, because I'm actually in the commercial district. I don't have a horse in the game here. I don't have any rental units, but I have 20 years of experience prior. And I have 4 houses in my immediate area that have been for sale for $250,000 or less, which is absolutely affordable housing in Jackson. And they were all bought and turned into very nice rental units. Now, that house, nobody bought it in Jackson to make it a second home, because someone who's moving to Jackson doesn't want to take the property that these people are buying up for $250,000 or $300,000 and fixing up with their own equity and blood, sweat, and tears, and making into nice units for vacationers to Jackson, instead of everybody having to stay down on the strip. It's much nicer to stay up here. But I think that $250,000 house is a fixer-upper in Jackson, but you can buy it in Conway for $150,000. So the whole affordable housing, you also have to realize someone who's going to come in and want to buy up a house to make it a rental isn't going to buy a house on Jackson Highlands for $750,000, because even at 60% rental, it's not going to cover itself. If you're trying to limit to 33, I mean, I don't even think they're not even going to be in that game.
Right.
So I think what you're trying to do and preserve the neighborhoods and the year-round residential use is kind of a stretch.
And yet we have
but I
some,
do think
we do
Sarah
have
makes
some
a good
homes that
point.
have been purchased and have been advertised. We have Realtor in the room. A listing, for example, where the folks say $64,000 worth of revenue in this home that's a 2-bedroom home that's in a residential neighborhood, and the reason it's getting, that sounds kind of high, doesn't it? It sounded high to me, but maybe they were maybe overstating their level, but again, this is a home that is short-term rental. It's in a residential neighborhood, and it was entirely a short-term rental before. The person who purchased it obviously bought it as a short-term rental property. And the question is, how many more of those do we want to have? If something generates $64,000, that covers a lot of handle for a home. And I think that particular instance, it was in the $500,000 range. Okay, so that works about right. But how many more of those do you want? And, do we want one that's a 14-room place up on top of the ridge here, and that all of a sudden becomes a luxury rental process, whatever. How many of those do you want? And to the extent we have neighborhoods where, it's not the $700,000 home, it's a $300,000 to $400,000 home, and it is a residential area. Somebody looking at trying to do this as a business, how many folks are going to come in and do that when they know they're going to have be restricted to an occupancy that's going to be 50% or less? It ain't going to happen. So what we're doing is we're going to be limiting the number of people who are going to be looking at Jackson as the kind of investor-only short-term rental process. And the only people who are going to look at things in terms of short-term rentals are folks who understand what the economics are and understand what the benefit is. For folks who are second homeowners, being able to do this, we're going to actually ask them to comply with state law when they do their short-term rental. And that's part of what this does. And by the way, the town gets some of the revenue from the R&M, and that would be a good thing for us to have.
As well as the tax revenue from the property.
As well as tax revenue, right.
And I don't think the town gets any R&M.
Right. Scott's right.
That goes into a general fund.
Can I ask Bob a question? Being in a realty business, do you understand what the ratio between permanent residents in Jackson by household, I mean, not number of people, I know how many people are registered to vote in Jackson, but how many households there are in Jackson that are full-time properties, And how many homes in Jackson are so-called second homes or vacation homes?
Off the top of my head, I don't, but I think that the
There are other-
primary residents who vote here should have priority over.
Well, no, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking how many, I'm trying to define the neighborhood.
Yeah, I don't know, do you have it?
It's under 400
Yes, it is.
400 out of how many?
out of, I think there, over 900 residences in
There's
town.
over 1,500.
Is 1,500? Okay, that's
So
right.
out of 1,500 homes, only 400 are permanent
Primary.
residents.
Yes.
So when you're talking about neighborhoods, and think about what brings people to Jackson. They first were in a ski club maybe, or they stayed at the Wentworth, or they stayed in a home they rented, and they liked Jackson, and they bought a home here. And maybe they send kids to the, hopefully they'll send kids to the grammar school, because Lord knows we need them. But what brings people to Jackson is the ability to stay in Jackson somewhere. Whether it's in a lodging like Christmas Farm Inn or Wentworth Hall, or whether it's renting a unit in the Wentworth Estates, or at someplace on, like one of the condos on Black Mountain. But those are the things that, and I agree with these folks, we shouldn't talk about that as in a disparaging way. It's what brings people to Jackson.
But we still need a place for those
Again, if
people.
I may respond, again, Jerry, I'm saying for the occasional rental for a second homeowner who's just trying to cover a couple of operating costs like utilities or taxes and make zoning it easier, you know, we should be able to live with that. I'm just concerned about the degree. And when people start scooping these things up from out of the area, and they don't even, they're not, it's not a second home to them. They're not, some of them probably don't even plan on spending a single night there. They'll put a key box with a code next to the door and go at it. I have a problem with that. That takes it into the character of it being a business, commerce, and it's non-owner occupied. If it's owner occupied, I think the zoning still allows for that. I think Dick confirmed that, and that's fine. But otherwise, I applaud the board for trying to kind of get a grip on this thing, set some limits, and get it away from the notion of these houses being potential businesses in residential zones. If you find a house in the village district that is commercially zoned, go at it. There should be no restrictions on that for how many nights it gets rented. But I just think we're losing sight over what's going on, not only here in Jackson, not only in the Mount Washington Valley, not only in New Hampshire, the US. Europe is struggling with this big time. We have to get a grip on it. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
And good zoning is...
I'm going to allow one more comment, and then I'm going to pull back the conversation. And that is that because at this point, we're kind of locked in. All right? And I appreciate your comments. And this is it. We're not going to make any changes to what we have. We can't because...
Why are you locked in?
Because that is what's required. Once we have that first public hearing and we post it, the only changes we can make no substantive changes. We can make changes for clarity, i.e. if I put "dot," I meant "and," or if I said "town" and it should have been "state," or for example, on the thing that, which I hope helped allay some of your concerns, the Armstrongs, where we said we weren't intending to, we said specifically last public hearing that we had no intention of going back for current existing short-term rentals in the rural residential district and going and saying the 30, or at the time 25 limit was going to apply to them. Putting that in, those are kinds of things that just clarify, and so we can do clarity, but other than that, we're restricted.
They're called editorial changes.
Pardon?
They're called editorial changes.
We
By
can't.
the RSAs.
Well,
But
okay.
my point is, what's the penalty to you of of incorporating some of the things you've heard tonight?
The penalty is that we no longer have a warrant article, and we cannot
This year.
present it as a
This year.
warrant article this year.
Correct.
And so we either have a choice to move forward with this warrant article this year, or keep everybody, and this is the choice, this is really the choice we have, when we make a vote, right after the public hearing is closed, whether we actually go to a warrant article, whether it has to be supported by the board. And that vote needs to be made and done. If we support it, it will go forward, and it has to be a majority. And if we do not, then this warrant will not be presented for voters. And then the voters get to choose, and they can say what they want. The reason I support it, the reason I want to move forward with it, is right now, folks who are in the short-term rental business right now have no basis really for them to sit there and say, my business is secure. And the town is really in a very poor position in terms of their having looked at businesses that are in the residential district for enforcement purposes. Could they end up finding themselves in litigation for that? Yes, they could. What this does is it allows the town to move forward. It pretty much says, here's where we are right now. It gives us a basis on which, and by the way, the state legislation, all the state legislation has this process that's going to say you need to register your business.
I don't have any problem with that at all.
And all we're saying is we're not going to wait for the state legislation to create a streamlined process.
I just meant I wanted it easier for the people to do.
We would like
that.
it to be easier too.
Yes,
but
and to me it's starting to be really cumbersome. Going back and forth and how it needs to be done and things like that. That was my only objection.
Yeah, I understand, but
We don't have any other.
we don't have another option. We don't have another option. If we had another option, we might consider it. We don't have another option currently.
Okay.
And we have one more comment, please.
The only comment I
Again,
would-
please identify yourself.
Becky Armstrong,
Thank you.
Jackson. The only comment that I wanted to make is, as a whole, things have changed when it comes to people who go on vacation. I think we all know that. It used to be that people would come up, they'd stay in inns, or like when we had kids, we didn't take our kids anywhere because we couldn't afford to go do that. Now we've got young families with young kids who will come and rent a house because they can actually afford to do that. And so I just feel like it's sort of a sign of the times. Things have changed. It's not the way it used to be. People don't vacation the way they used to vacation. And I know that it's hard for the towns because all of a sudden you've got more people or people you don't want in your town, or you've got visitors you don't want. But
Again, it's a balance,
it's
because
like when we all go on vacation, what's the first thing we do? We go on to Airbnb and we look for a place to stay.
But-
And I did ask a few of my guests, since this all happened, I said, if you couldn't rent a place in Jackson, would you go stay in an inn? They said, no, we would not. We would go stay in another town where we could rent a house. So it's a whole different animal. It's not the same people that, a couple that just goes to stay in an inn.
But people would not enjoy Jackson like they do if we didn't have the community that we do. Part of what we're trying to do here is protect the community, and that's where the balance is. We don't want all short-term rentals, and we don't want no short-term rentals. It's a balance.
Absolutely.
How to strike a balance that satisfies everyone? I don't know that this does that, but I think it comes reasonably close, and we've made a best effort here to try to do that.
How are you going to police the 30? Who's going to police that?
Well, the good part is that it's only for the new folks, and we expect that we're not going to have all that many new ones. Okay, and
That's not clear in this. that doesn't say anything about being grandfathered.
And that gets to the point of the underlined item, please, which we talked about earlier on. 4.4.5.1, underline, short-term rentals in existence in the rural residential district. At the time of adoption of this ordinance at the March 12, 2020 annual town meeting shall be exempt from the restriction on the number of annual rentals. Do you have that?
No, I had this printed up by the women in the office 2 days ago.
Okay,
so
you
I
didn't
don't-
get one that was on coming in, okay. And we did this in response, we did, thank you for your wonderful letter, by the way, you guys.
Thank you.
The Armstrongs provided, indicating the pluses of their business in town, and we don't disagree. I don't disagree, maybe folks do, but I don't. I think that we have to have a little bit of everything here. And the thing is that if you don't manage what you have, then, and if it's very lucrative for other folks to come in, you know, the whole town becomes a short-term rental place. And that's not what we want. And also, if you're currently a short-term rental, I don't know how this hurts anybody. If you're a short-term rental owner right now, this is a plus for you, because you aren't going to have 6 or 12 other short-term rental only people coming into town and buying up properties. If you're a homeowner, I think this benefits you because you know that your neighborhood's not going to end up having 50 short-term rentals in it. It's going to have probably the mix of what we have right now. And if you don't like the mix of what you have right now, you know, you probably didn't buy into what this town is. And I agree with your assessment, Kathleen, that that we have been a mix of things where people rent, people live here full time, but it's always been a manageable level of everything. And the issue with short-term rentals, as we comment I think you made, Bob, is that unregulated, a short-term rental process in a resort town can take over the whole town. It can, and it's possible that could occur. And for the folks who live here full-time, that's not what we want. Okay, please, one more comment. Your name, please.
James Gleason. Is the only thing that existing short-term rentals are exempt from is the 30-day restriction?
Yes, exactly so.
So they're going to have to register, they're going to have to sign affidavits?
Yes, yep. Everything is going to be similar. We want to have a similar administration for the whole process, yeah.
Because, I mean, the M&R tax, I think, is a levels the playing field a little bit for
Yes.
bed and breakfast.
Yes,
So-
absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
Technical question. So those short-term rentals that are in existence as of March 12th, they get registered, but 3 years from now, the house gets sold, and the next owner has no interest in rentals at all, but it can't be, and then they sell 3 or 4 years knowing, gee, this once was a short-term rental, can that be resurrected with, say, the third owner? It seems like this is sort of, in a sense, you're allowing a non-conforming use as of the date the ordinance goes in effect, but once it's abandoned.
We asked about a sunset clause,
Yeah.
and that would be a substantial change, so that might be something that we amend going forward, but.
We thought of that too late to include it.
Well, it really hasn't been addressed one way or the other, has it?
No, but we could add a sunset clause, through the next
Once it gets
legislative
signed,
session.
There is a
it's discontinued
sunset
in the
clause.
short-term rental.
So maybe that applies.
We do have a sunset clause already in our regulations for non-conforming use, and so that could apply. We would assume that would apply, but
I think you should confirm that.
I don't know that this is non-conforming if it's.
Well,
It's
yeah,
not non-conforming.
Right,
so
It's a special use permit.
Right. So in effect, we went through that process, the same thing you're talking about, and we kind of realized too late that by doing this, we in effect were saying it's not a non-conforming use if we pass this, and therefore, the other thing was for non-conforming use, and we'd like that to apply, but if we had to add it now, then we can't add it because it's a substantive change.
It's not, one point, the idea of an existing STR, by definition, one night for compensation that you let your home, you are an existing STR.
One night and less than 30.
Right.
If you have-
Right. My point is to qualify for the no limit issue that you make. I've let my home for compensation one night. Therefore, I qualify as an existing STR.
Ian, have you also then registered your home with the...
Prior
have
to
you obtained
this
have you
ordinance.
obtained the rooms and material, and you can show proof that you paid rooms and material tax, as a for example?
But prior to this ordinance, you had no regulation for that. In other words, that's between me and the state, not me and the town.
It's very possible as part of the determination of this that
I
we
agree.
will ask
But
you.
now I have to register with the state and pay whatever.
No, you had to previously, according to state law. That has been in place for years. Sorry.
Right, that's what I'm saying, is it, but I didn't have to prove it to the town that I have that before. Now I do.
Now you do.
And so I'll get it.
Yeah.
But I will state, I've let my home for one night.
And I think the likelihood that many, if anybody, is going to do that is very small.
I recognize, but it's a.
Yeah, but I guess
I mean,
you can.
I'm sort of
And you
reinforcing
need to
what Bob-
realize the responsibility around that, and also realize that you will continue to have monthly requirements to report to the state your rooms and meals tax,
Even if you don't rent.
even if
Yeah.
you do not rent.
But if you don't rent, you don't have to pay anything.
Yeah, but you have to
You gotta
report.
file a paper.
You still have to file.
Right.
So you have to go through the process. Also, you need to be aware that if you are in this business and you are registered as such, your insurance company probably would like to know that. Because your insurance rates are going to go up by about 30%,
Based on the number of times you rent.
based on whatever your insurance company does, yes.
Oh my.
Yeah, right? I mean, you guys who are in the business, you know this stuff.
Well, it's my home. I'm a full-time resident, so I'm not really in the business.
Yeah,
We were though.
Yeah, I did before I moved from San.
but we have, again, my point is if you've been doing this and you've been meeting all the requirements, this is no big deal. If you are new to this and you haven't been meeting the requirements, yeah, it is a big deal because all of a sudden you're being asked to do what's required of a short-term rental provider. And yes, it's more onerous, and it should be. And if it weren't, then everyone could be a short-term rental owner and say, yeah, I can do this, and be able to do it.
Yeah.
Would you take a, have we answered all your questions?
Yes,
Are you
you've done a good
satisfied
job.
with
I
stuff?
understand it pretty clearly.
Okay, all right. All right, that's what I really wanted to know.
Any other?
This is the warrant article that you handed out, because this is what's going on the town warrant.
Yes.
If planning board votes for
The underlying changes have to be approved. We will do that as soon, we will review that for approval as soon as the public hearing is closed.
So if it fails at town meeting, then what happens to new people that are coming in and wanting to, but then what
They
happens?
take the chances
We
with
take
the
the
current
chances
zoning.
just like they do now.
Then they'll be having to abide by the current rule, which doesn't allow short-term rentals.
As we interpret it, yes, or as I interpret it, say that.
Okay.
Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I make a motion that we adjourn the public meeting?
I'll second that.
Okay, public hearing is closed. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, we are, this is a